Okay, so this is my response for the third part of the Bell reading. So to explain it to someone who hasn't read it, a little iffy on it because I'm still trying to comprehend it. I think it takes a little bit before it like fully clicks, and usually after a discussion in class, which won't necessarily happen because today was the last class. But anyways, so it first starts and talks about queer theory and how using terms like gay and lesbian had like a gender associated with it, and so using the word queer as like kind of like a against the norm but not necessarily like bad type of thing. So it talked about that, and then the stakes in life and death and performance, and then one part that I found really interesting was kind of how it brought in the other chapters about it was like performativity is faking, making, and breaking, and then it added on like staking and like a political sense. And so this chapter kind of focuses on the political aspects of identity and how over time we've used identity to kind of break the norms and combat the legal system and the bad laws in place that target specific groups of people. And so it says, explain how Bell positions performativity as a political practice / strategy in terms of agency, disidentification, and queer theory. So I kind of talked about queer theory in the sense that, again, it's like taking away the gender association with sexuality to kind of just be like categorizing it is also kind of not necessarily harmful in a sense, but it's just like sexuality and gender are kind of things that don't necessarily need to like intertwine, where it's like you don't have to be like, I'm a boy and I'm attracted to girls. You can just be like, I'm a human being and I like other human beings. Like that kind of a thing. It's just kind of like we don't have to identify that, and like not identifying is like, I don't know. I'm trying, I'm sorry. A lot of big words in this, and I'm still trying to comprehend. But again, kind of like how we use different identifications were like identities that were placed on like us. So like if you are someone being identified as queer, someone who's being identified as a specific race, there are times where those people come together and they stand up together, and it's like you can take down one of us but you can't take down all of us, and so it leads to political reforms, like, and it talks about like the different like sit-ins during the civil rights movement, and just like people coming together, people that are different coming together and unifying for a cause. So these, what are the life and death stakes of performativity as a political practice? So in that part of the chapter, it talked about the John Joan case, where it was a little boy whose penis was severed in surgery, and so they opted to remove his testicles, give him hormones, and say he was a girl. And so I think it's interesting in the sense that people place this big emphasis on like the gender you were born as, whereas like here it was this little boy who was born as a boy, you know, but then he got his genitalia removed and now all of a sudden he's a girl, regardless of what he feels like. And growing up, like he didn't necessarily consent to just have his testicles removed and like being treated like a girl. And that we're so like as a society, we were so against being against the norm. And like, yes, the doctors made a mistake, but to fix the mistake, they're like, well, what's the thing we can do to make this natural and make him into something that we can consider normal? It's like, oh, well, we can give him a fake vagina, give him hormones, and say he's a girl. And I think it's interesting that, like, you know, like that happened, but then people are still being like, well, you were born with this, so you have to be this. Like, it's like, well, no. There's a very big difference between your sex and your gender. And in my opinion, sex is really only relatable when it comes to medical stuff. When you're going to a doctor, then yeah, you probably need to know what your genitalia is and like how your specific hormones are. But other than that, I think it's irrelevant, and gender is what you feel like you are, because constructs, whatever. Another thing that they used for, oh, excuse me, choking on my spit. Another thing that they talked about in that part was how different people who like died of AIDS, and like even kind of after like in their death, they were like used as, look what's happening, like people are dying. And I know Nixon like labeled AIDS as like the gay disease, when in like reality, like a lot of people that were affected by AIDS like weren't even gay. They, you know, it's not the only way to get it. Like, you don't have to be, just because you have AIDS doesn't mean you're gay. Just because you're gay doesn't mean you have AIDS. Like, they're two completely different entities, but it was labeled as this gay disease. And a lot of like funding for research for AIDS was like cut, and they didn't care because they're like, well, it only affects the gays. And it's like, well, we should care if it did only affect the gays, but too, like, it didn't only affect them. But there was a lot of political movements, like afterwards, after so many people were dying, were like, hey, can we like do something about this? And so it says, at the beginning of the chapter, Bell encourages us to use theories as performativity to shift existential questions of identity from who am I to how am I a subject in this world. How does considering performativity as a theory of identity constitution, as a strategy of a critique, and as a political practice help you rethink the essential question posed at the beginning of Bell's chapter? How are you and others a subject in history, language, and material ways of being in the world? A lot of words. So kind of what I think is just like, I think it's just like kind of like an analogy, what I can kind of think of off the top of my head is the argue of like, are people born good or bad? And it's like, I always said, well, people are born a blank slate and they mold into the way that they become because of their outside environment and influences. And I think in a way that can also be ring true with like identity. We're born as a blank slate and just like a person that exists in history, and depending on when in history we're born, where we were born in the world, like what culture we were born into kind of shapes the way we identify ourselves and how other people identify us. So you're just kind of born as a blank slate, and okay, you're born with this genitalia. At a young age, you are identified to be this specific gender. And as you grow older and you experience more things and you kind of experience your own problems and your own comings and own issues, then you might still be like, I identify as this. And then you change yourself in a way so that other people identify you in that same way. And like same thing with like race. You're born as a blank slate, but then you're born with a specific skin color in a specific part of the world from ancestors from different parts of the world. And other people are like, oh, you are European descent. You're from African descent. This is your culture. This is your race. This is your nationality. These are all the things that we see you as a physical ways of you are. And like same thing with like language. When you're born, you don't know a language, and you're taught a language of the people, like the language that the people speak around you. And it's like, that's an identity that's put on you, that you are a native English speaker because of where you were from and who you're around when you were young. This is what you learned because we taught you that. So yeah, I don't know if I got any of that right, but it makes sense in my head and it makes me think. And even if I got it wrong, I'm like, dang, that's pretty deep. Thanks for a great semester. Love you a long time.